Okay, good morning, everyone. Warm welcome on behalf of the Southeast Europe Association and the Aspen Institute, Germany. My name is Christian Hagemann. I'm the Executive Director of the Southeast Europe Association, and I'm here today with my colleague and co-host, Stormy Mildner, the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute, as well as our great panel, which is here but still has to start their cameras again to be visible. As you all know, together with the Aspen Institute, we partnered up this year again to organize the Civil Society Forum of the Berlin Process, and we also are also doing this event together. I'm very glad that we have the chance to have this event so shortly before the holidays, and that it also sparked so much interest in our Western Balkans community. And I think altogether, this is a very good opportunity and a very good closure event of the Berlin Process anniversary year we've had in 2024. So we actually had the idea for this event during the Civil Society Forum and like the entire October of conferences related to the Berlin Process, where we realized that there were so many great studies out there regarding the anniversary, and we felt that even to have them at the conferences did not really give them all the attention they deserved for all the hard work that went into them. So this event serves the purpose to give these studies another platform to be presented and to be discussed. But at the same time, and this is like the second purpose, we thought it would be good to have these studies also presented together to benefit from synergies and to finally discuss the results together and see them next to each other. So the idea is also that we can learn from the different fields by comparing them with each other. Yes, so here we are, and we will start with brief presentations of the studies. You have received the links for the studies already with the invitation to this event, so you can look them up. Probably many of you have already read them. We will therefore start with the brief kickoffs. And as you see, we have a very busy schedule. We have many studies and only very limited time, and also want to bring in the audience at some point. So I have to be a very strict timekeeper here and have to limit the presentation time per author to a maximum of 5 minutes. So this means that they can be mostly brief overviews with the core results that will later kick off our discussion. Before we start now, a few housekeeping rules for the discussion we will have afterwards. This invitation sparked a lot of interest, so we decided to turn this from a meeting format into a webinar format because it would have been very, very difficult otherwise to handle this. Still, we would like to give you the opportunity to join actively. So if you would like to pose a question in the second part of this event, you can just use, as you know it, the raise your hand function, and then we will give you the opportunity to speak and enable your microphone, and then you can put your question directly. If we have a lot of hands raised, naturally it will be difficult to take them all in. So then you can also use the Q&A function and place your question there, and we will also keep an eye on these. Yes, so we're going to start now with the presentations. I'm going to moderate this part, and after this I will hand over to Stormy Mildner, who will take over the moderation of the discussion and the Q&A. So I'm very glad that we have the stock-taking study 10 years of the Berlin Process with us, the one that was developed in the realm of the Civil Society Forum, and the one that Marika Jolaj and Silvana Mojzowska worked very hard on, and we had the chance to establish with the support of the Federal Foreign Office. I would like to give you a brief introduction of Marika Jolaj. She's a visiting research fellow at the Political Science and International Studies Department of the University of the Peloponnese and a member of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group, famously known as BPAC. Most of you will have heard of this. And Silvana Mojzowska, she's a full-time professor in international economics at the Institute of Economics at the University in Skopje, the University St. Cyril and Methodius in North Macedonia, with her key areas of work, EU integration, international trade, globalization, and sustainable development. So we're going to start with your presentations now, and I will hand in the word first over to Marika, please.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's a pleasure to be here. And um, I want to start by saying that preparing this stock-taking study was, both challenging and gratifying experience because when we started, I've been following Berlin process as analyst and participant since 2015. And certainly, when you asked me to co-author the study, I was kind of confident in thinking that I know a lot about it. But then when we started actually doing research and trying to find out, to map everything that was generated in the past decade, um, I was quite amazed to how much I didn't know about it and how much I still have to learn. Um, so I'm not going to talk about the Berlin process descriptively because all our webinar participants can read our study. I'm just going to highlight a couple of elements that I found very relevant for kind of assessing what has been achieved, but also for thinking about how to go forward from where we are now in 2024. It's important. One thing I want to say about the study is that we divided for analytical purposes in the Berlin processes and intervention in six topical fields, and I covered in analysis I covered three, and my colleague Silvana um, covered three. So my focus was on societal cooperation, political and security cooperation, and foreign policy aspect of the Berlin process. And here I would like to highlight the word cooperation because I think that's one of the main contributions that the Berlin process actually made. When we look at it back in 2014 and where the Western Balkan countries were, um, with very fragile relations and almost lack of cooperation between some, then I think we can agree that in these terms, bringing all six Western Balkan countries on board and finding a viable mechanism uh, to allow them to cooperate in different fields, I think is one of the most important both outputs and outcomes ultimately. Um, so the field of societal cooperation was very rich. It covered, um, areas from civil society to Roma integration to reconciliation. So everything that really breaks down societal fabric in the Western Balkans and which needs improvement. I think probably for me most valuable is that the civil society was given a platform to influence policy, maybe not decision making, but certainly decision thinking, and to engage in all these important initiatives that the Berlin process was launching. In terms of political and security cooperation, again, um, focus on, for example, security issues and organized crime, a little bit on corruption, and certainly I would say here, but we can pick it up in the discussion, not enough focus on the rule of supporting the rule of law, which I think is maybe one of the weakest points of the Berlin process because you cannot have strong regional cooperation um, without having strong institutions and the rule of law. And then finally, in the foreign policy domain, I would say that engaging foreign ministers who effectively negotiated and enabled all the initiatives to be agreed and implemented, I think, is one of the most important mechanisms of the Berlin process. I will conclude by saying that we need to, and maybe it wasn't so surprising, but certainly most significant, is that the Berlin process is a political support platform, initiated by the German government, and it's not an entity or a body that has independent funding, which then it distributes, and that's how we need to. Appreciate what has been brought to the Western Balkan countries and think whether they were actually use this offer to the maximum potential. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marika, for your contribution and also for sticking so much to the time. And I would like to hand directly over to Silvana. What are the key findings from your point of view, and what results probably did you find most interesting?
Thank you, Christian. This study provides an outlook of what has happened in the past 10 years, and definitely during the process of elaboration, I think anyone who was involved in it, especially me and Marika, was somehow surprised how many initiatives actually passed during these 10 years. They were adopted, some of them were processed further, some of them not. So the first finding that I find really noteworthy to be mentioned here is that any of the initiative which was related to a regional economic integration, connectivity, or green transition was, if it was supported by financial support by the European Union and backed up with some institutional structure, there was a chance for that initiative to be proceed further. There were total of 43 initiatives. And out of that, I would say that truly successful were around 10 in all these areas that we covered. I was working on the issues related to regional economic integration, transport and connectivity, green transition, and science and research. One of the most important areas related to the Berlin process, and one of the most known to the people, is actually the issue of regional economic cooperation, which started as with the initiative for setting a regional economic area of the region, and then it was upgraded to common regional market. The first one, which is ending now, the action plan is ending now, and the second one, which was adopted on the Berlin process this year. There was a significant financial support by the European Commission to this, and many international organizations and regional organizations were involved in its implementation. So the main finding here would be that initiative of this scope could be politically adopted by the leaders of the Western Balkan and participant countries of the Berlin process, but its implementation is definitely related to involvement of many stakeholders, particularly regional organizations. And in that sense, especially this one was very complex. It included 3 layers of cooperation, not just also a part of this, what I've mentioned, also the business cooperation. So we had from a very operational level, the businesses, up till the political level. It shows that this process has been also complex. It was very often perceived as a political process, and it is primarily, but it translated in a very tangible initiatives and very tangible results in some areas for the people. of the region. But on the other hand, given that the region is specific as it is, and then in parallel there are other processes, of course, putting there such wide initiatives also bring risks that some of them will actually not be implemented with all the results that were planned. So better coordination among all the initiatives, among the assistance of the European Union that exist a part of this process needs to be done in order to enhance the results of the Berlin process. Another thing that was interesting was the findings relating to the science and research topic, which was actually the most difficult to be composed as a pillar here due to the lack of data. And there is a lot of potential to work here because there are many other groups that were established meanwhile, NGOs, academic networks, and so on. But actually, they all exist like some isolated islands that are not connected very much. So that is one of the findings where further efforts are needed. And at the end, I will finish with the green transition, which actually during the Berlin process followed all the developments that were on the global level and on the level of the European Union. That means this process is also dynamic, as especially the dynamic topics like this, they evolve and many changes were needed here. So finding a mechanism that would actually address all these specific issues of the process, specific characteristics is needed in order for the process to become even more successful. But as a process itself, it was really rich in terms of initiatives and in terms of involvement of the people. And it brought some significant results for the region, at least as a forum of bringing up the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvana, for this presentation. And to the both of you for this very good overview and these insights. And we're going to come back to these in the course of the discussion. So this was the presentation on the stock-taking study, 10 years of the Berlin process. And we're going to continue now with the study Missing Gender Perspectives in the Berlin Process. And this will be presented by the author Marie Kirchner, who's an associate researcher at the Institute for Democracy in Skopje and a freelance policy consultant working on issues of European integration and democratization in Southeast Europe, with particular attention to gender equality and marginalized groups. And Marie is also a PhD candidate at the University of Graz. So I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, Marie. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for everyone who's come here today to listen to our stock takings. I have to say already, I'm glad we started with the more positive view of the first study, which really sees where the Berlin process has been successful. Because if we're looking at gender and gender perspectives, it's not quite as positive, but that just means that there's a lot of room for improvement, which I hope to see. The report, this report, Missing Gender Perspectives in the Berlin Process, through Kvinna to Kvinna, I came very quickly to realize that gender matters in a lot of different dimensions. And I found it very helpful to look at 3 different dimensions to see how gender matters, how gender did not matter in the Berlin process. The first dimension being the who, the second dimension being the what, and the third dimension being the how, allowing me to look at questions of representation, at topics discussed, and then also at structures and processes. And I want to break the main findings on these 3 dimensions down very quickly. Before I start, I want to say that there is a real challenge with the lack of gender segregated data. So please keep in mind that this is really the first report of its kind that has been done on the Berlin process, and there's definitely a need to to go further and start collecting more gender segregated data in the future. But to get started, when we look at the dimension of who gets to participate, of course, if we're looking at the ministerial level, participation is dominated by men simply because of the fact that national politics, especially at the ministerial level, is still very largely dominated by men. There is it looks a little bit better at the civil society level, and where we have a lot of female experts who contribute to the Berlin process through those structured formats that were mentioned before. But we can definitely see challenges for women's or rights organizations who are not so much think tanks, who bring in a very technical expertise, but rather work on the bottom-up grassroots level. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well when we're talking about processes and structures. When it comes to the subjects discussed, we can see that gender equality has been virtually non-existent in the past 10 years of the Berlin process, or to say the last 9 years, because this year, for the first time, there was a change with the Gender Equality Forum and gender-specific working groups, with particular attention given to gender issues and particularly women's rights. But before that, in the past 9 years, gender equality was, if it was mentioned, it got very singular attention. It was very often considered a women's only concern, for example, women's participation, women in parliaments, but not really as a cross-cutting issue. And even this year, we could see that gender equality, gender matters were only discussed in the context of the Gender Equality Forum and the Gender Equality Working Group, also singling out this working group as the only space for gender to be discussed and not as a cross-cutting issue. And then this relates as well to the how, to the processes. The question here is like, who gets access to decision making, or as Marika has also said, to decision thinking, whose recommendations are considered, who has which topics are given priority over others, which are not. Here, when we're looking at gender, we can see that the non-existence of gender mainstreaming regulations, together with a general lack of knowledge on the importance of a gender dimension, really contributes to the fact that there is very little awareness about gender in this entire process. And then in addition, what I mentioned before, challenges of who get to participate in this context also relate to the processes. The process is very technical, very policy focused when we're looking at the civil society side. And this is a capacity that very often women-led movements or women-led organizations with a specific gender perspective do not bring to the table, just because of the way they're structured, adding another level of difficulty for bringing gender perspectives into the Berlin process. So to sum it up, I want to say that the Berlin process of the past 10 years has shown us that if gender equality and women's rights are not decisively mentioned and are given a dedicated spot on the agenda, they will likely be ignored. And 2024 was a good year to correct some of the processes past blind spots on gender, but the question will now be how to keep it going. And I would say that if the Gender Equality Forum and those corresponding structures will be discontinued, gender would likely be banished again from the Berlin process, as we have seen in past years. So yeah, that's from my side now, but I don't want to end on such a negative point. So please bring in your questions. I'm sure that we can talk about it later and see how to keep the gender dimensions and the gender perspectives in the process going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. So this was the presentation of the report Missing Gender Perspectives in the Berlin Process, published by the Kvinna Foundation. And probably on a more happier note, as I look at the panel now, at least when it comes to the research on the Berlin process and the studies, we have a very good gender balance when it comes to female participation, I would say. So we're going to go to the third study, which is 10 years of the Berlin process, economic development in the Western Balkans since 2014, which was supported by the BMWK and published by Berlin Economics. And the author of the study is also with us. It's Marie Salupiata, who's a consultant and project manager at Berlin Economics, an economic policy consultancy specializing in government advisory services. And as part of the German economic team government advisory project, she coordinates government advisory activities in 7 project countries, including also the Western Balkans. So now I'm also very much looking forward on the key findings on the economic side, apart from those that we have already heard from Svan. You have the floor, Marie.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope that you can see my slides. Maybe a short thumbs up.
Yes, works well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Christian. I'm actually also calling in from the Western Balkans, as I'm in Pristina at the moment, where we indeed, in the context of our project, offering government advisory activities to the high-ranking decision makers here in Pristina. So nice to be here with you online today and present this study, which takes a bit of an economic policy angle to the evaluation of the Berlin process over the past 10 years. Let's see. Okay. Now should be better, I think. Okay, perfect. So indeed, our study adopts an economic policy angle to the question whether or not the Berlin process has been successful over the past 10 years. And to this end, what we do is looking at 5 key goals, which were set in the context of the Berlin process and which also received kind of the most attention over the past decade of the Berlin process. These 5 goals would be firstly the promotion of economic development in the region. Then secondly, the decarbonization of the Western Balkans economies. Thirdly, we have the promotion of trade within the region, but then also with the EU. Fourthly, we also look into the approximation of policy environments to EU standards. And then last but not least, we also look into the promotion of investment into the region. To evaluate whether or not the Berlin process has been successful in establishing an environment to work towards these goals, we choose 5 corresponding economic indicators and then assess how these indicators have developed over the past 10 years. So here's our results from a regional perspective, but we also did this country by country, so maybe we can get into this during the discussion. Starting with the first goal that we looked into, the promotion of the economic growth in the region, we looked at GDP as the main indicator. And what we see when we look at average real GDP growth over the past decade is that this stands at 3.1% per year. At first glance, this might not seem very high, especially considering that many of the countries in the region are still in kind of an economic development stage. On the other hand, however, the last 10 years have also seen great adverse shocks to the region that have affected growth in the region negatively. Most notably, we have had the COVID-19 pandemic, but then also the ongoing Russian aggression in Ukraine and associated cost of living crisis, and also the immigration trends in the region. So what we conclude is that over the past 10 years, growth might not have been very high, but at least resilient to these kind of adverse developments. So here we would attest that the Berlin process has had a mixed balance. Moving on to decarbonization, we look into the carbon intensity of the Western Balkan 6 economies and the CO2 emissions. Here we see that the emission intensity of the Western Balkan 6 in 2022 has still been 4 times higher than that of the EU. And also looking at the development of CO2 emissions over time, we see that the decrease has been under the average of the global developments, but also compared to the EU. So from 2014 to 2022, emissions decreased by around 15% in the Western Balkans, while on global average, this has been at 17%, and the EU has even been at 22%. So here we would conclude there's still a lot of room for the Berlin process to put this issue into the focus and to speed up the developments in the region. Thirdly, this has already been mentioned also by Silvana, is the issue of trade within the Western Balkan region and also in the EU. Here we look at the share of trade from the region and from the EU as a share of total trade. And looking at the EU, we see that this is very high. So EU is still by far the most important trading partner for the Western Balkans. However, this share has also been very steady over the past 10 years. So there have not been very dynamic developments with regard to the role of the EU as a trading partner. Looking at the role of regional trade, the picture is even a bit more negative. So we see that Western Balkan countries don't really trade a lot with each other. And what is more, this share has even decreased over the past 10 years over which the Berlin process has been active. So also here we would say there is still a lot of room to put these initiatives into practice and put this issue into the focus. Moving on to the better news for the last two goals that we looked into, this would be the alignment of policies with EU standards, for which we use the OECD Western Balkans competitiveness scores. And here we see that there has been great success in aligning the policy environments in the Western Balkans with that of the EU, and a lot of progress across all of the countries. And with the exception of only one indicator, policy environments have advanced greatly towards EU standards. News are also quite positively when it comes to foreign direct investment in the region, which has increased a lot over the past 10 years. Especially starting from 2022, we see that FDI inflows in the region are really high and are even at a comparable level to the other EU candidate countries. So approximately the level of Georgia, and then even higher than Ukraine and Moldova. So also for this, we would conclude that the Berlin process has been successful in fostering an environment where the region is on the list of foreign direct investors and is seen as a real option for those investors. Summing up, what we would say when it comes to evaluating the success of the Berlin process is that a mixed picture emerges. So we have seen very good results for alignment to EU policies and also for investment. However, for decarbonization and especially for regional trade, we would still see a lot of room for improvement. I'm happy to take this up in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all again for these very interesting discussions and also for leaving us so much time to discuss now. So I would like to encourage everyone in the audience to raise your hands if you would like to put your questions or to put your questions in the Q&A section, and I hand over to Stormy.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. That was fantastic. And also thank you so much for staying in the time limit. Since we don't have any questions coming in yet in the Q&A function, and I would like to emphasize again that we do want to discuss with you. And I also don't see any hands coming up yet. I also have a few questions prepared for our panelists to do a follow-up. All of you have highlighted some successes and some failures. In the first round, I would like to dig a little bit deeper and ask you to just summarize in a couple of points again, where you think this has been done really, really well, and this has been like a real failure. And then in the second round, I would like to dig into the failures and ask you why it failed. So what were the stumbling blocks in the process? But maybe we start first with Marika, and maybe you could emphasize again, what was the big successes and what were the big failures?
Thank you, Stormy. I think in terms of big successes, I would absolutely highlight this, the ability of the Berlin process to facilitate cooperation between all 6 Western Balkan countries, because we know You know, there are issues between Serbia and Kosovo. There were issues between some other countries as well. And I think this fine diplomatic activity, which has been, I mean, we know from private conversations, which has been really led by Chancellor Merkel when she launched the Berlin process, I think ultimately is its biggest success because it not only brought all the 6 countries around the table, but it managed to keep them around the table as well, irrespective of changes of governments, people who lead the country, you know, priorities and political agendas. In terms of the failures, it's a big, you know, it's a strong word. I don't know whether you can really say, oh, we have this initiative lasting for 10 years and developing, and then you speak about the failure. But I think certainly one of the issues that has been problematic is lack of coordination mechanism between the hosts of the Berlin process, which would allow transferring the priorities in a logical and productive way, you know, along the chain of the Berlin process. So we often had situations that, for example, one host would pick security, then the next host would decide, oh no, I want to do health. And the next host comes and says, oh, I don't want to do health, but I will do Roma. So that I think has been disruptive in terms of the outcomes of the Berlin process and its overall impact.
Great. Thank you so much, Marika, for drilling down a little bit further and putting it so distinctly. That was extremely helpful. Silvana, do you agree with what Marika just said, or is your evaluation slightly different?
Yeah, that's correct, what she said, but I would just add that when we talk about success, I would point out some tangible results from the Berlin process, and one of them is digital agenda. And when bringing these initiatives to the people, then they start to see what is really the content of the initiative, what is the purpose. So digital agenda and roaming agreements definitely belong into the biggest successes of the Berlin process. Not just the process itself, but also it shows the cooperation of different institutions and support of the EU in all of this. So despite, as I've mentioned at the beginning, being a political forum, there is need of solid financial support for any of these initiatives to be really successful. On the side of what should be improved or what actually was not so successful, I've already gave a very short introduction to the science and research area that should be improved. And there is one initiative, Western Balkan Research Foundation, that was somehow initiated to be put in place, but then it was not, but it was difficult to find information. So one of the things that I would say should be done better with regards to the Berlin process is communication and visibility of the initiatives. Because it was very difficult for some of them to find proper data. At the end, after having an interview, we realized that in the area of science and research, there was some developments, and this first idea was replaced with support of the countries to be better integrated in the European research area, which also brings some benefits. So to highlight again, communication and visibility is something that should be developed, some strategy or plan, or I don't know what, to be developed for the Berlin process. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We come to the policy recommendations also a little later, I'm sure. And I also see that the first brave person wrote into the Q&A function. We are looking for more brave people to use this function, and I see the next one coming in. So I see what has been written, and we get to this in the next round. But I still want to also hear from our two other panelists. And Marie, maybe you want to come in and share your evaluation on successes and failures.
I assume me, Marie?
Yes. A little tricky because we have two.
Yeah.
Marie, I'm me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would immediately pick up from Marika and Silvana. So if Marika talked about cooperation as this really important element, and I think this is not, it doesn't only relate to cooperation between governments or among governments, but it also relates very closely to cooperation or cooperation channels between governments and civil society or the think tank community. And I think that is really a very important success story of the Berlin process, that it has enabled those communication channels in a way that no other high-level political process or structure ever does. And this, some years we see that there's more of it. Some years we see that it's less. In 2023, there was a little bit more direct cooperation also during ministerial meetings, which I think was a great success to really have those direct channels of communication. Relating this to the challenges, I agree that this lack of continuity and this lack of multi-annual commitment, maybe call it that, is really a big challenge. And this is also something that relates, I mentioned it before, to gender. This year was the first year that we really saw some commitment to including gender perspectives, but it happened because of a very strong commitment by the German government to a feminist foreign policy or feminist development policy. So this Gender Equality Forum was initiated by the Ministry for Development because of their commitment to a feminist development. And something like this really depends on national priorities and also national goodwill and also on individual ministers. And I think this is especially if we're looking at more at more normative elements of the process, less technical aspects. This is really a big failure or a big hurdle to have continuity. A normative agenda needs time to grow, needs time to develop, and if we don't have institutional formal continuity here, it's a really big challenge.
Thank you very much. You're hitting on very similar issues, so that's interesting. So the initiative and the handover and the priority and agenda setting by individual chairs, and also a lack of institutionalization of certain initiatives seem to be some of the problems. And I'm sure we are going to touch upon the issue, do we need more institutionalization of the process? But we come back to this after we hear from the other Marie.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what stood out to me from our analysis as kind of the biggest success of the Berlin process is this issue of EU alignment, where we really saw that across the different policy area, there has been an increasing alignment of policy environments to EU standards over the past decade. And even though you might not be able to attribute this 100% to the Berlin process, I think what this shows is that the Berlin process was at least able to create an environment that is conducive to the further alignment of the country's policy environments to EU standards. This also seems to me a bit like something that is a bit underappreciated in the debate surrounding the Berlin process, where I think EU fatigue is also a big keyword that pops up a lot of the time. So this was really interesting for me to see in our analysis of the developments of the past decade. And challenges, I think what I would like to pick up upon is mainly this issue of lacking regional trade, where I was surprised to see that it actually has developed negatively over the past decade, so that there is actually kind of less economic cooperation compared to the time when the Berlin process started. And I think this is still an area, despite having received a lot of attention, and apparently rightly so in the context of the Berlin process, where initiatives to bring together also the business leaders of the countries will still be fruitful in order to close this gap, because there is a lot of open space for trading between the Western Balkan countries, which should also be exploited.
Thank you very much. I know that I said just a few minutes ago in the second round, we want to look at stumbling blocks, but we're going to change this because I will pick up the first question in the chat function, which is really a very good question. And I will generalize it a little bit so that all four of you can answer to this. So you did mapping studies, and I think this is really important to highlight. And the mapping studies were commissioned as mapping studies and not impact studies. So you mostly looked at the output of the Berlin process under the different initiatives, under the different chairs, and not so much the outcome and the impact, which is a whole different ball game to look at, to really then also evaluate effectiveness. Impact assessments are always really very hard to do. Nonetheless, our participants are interested in the impact of the Berlin process, and also how you would say you could measure that impact, and if you actually can see causalities. And the question in the chat asked specifically about economic issues. So is there actually a causality between what has been done in the Berlin process and then investment coming in? Or does investment also come in from other countries which don't have anything to do with the Berlin process, like Russia and China, for example? But it's really overall the question of, can we go one step further and also say something about the impact of the Berlin process on the region? And if I may, I would start in the opposite order and start with economics. Marie, could you try to pick up on that big, difficult issue?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a very, very interesting question. So maybe I can tell a bit from the example of Kosovo, where I'm currently also staying. And there we have seen a lot of FDI inflows, especially over the past 2 years, and also seeing Europe and especially Germany playing a big role in that. And I think many of these are due to initiatives on a personal level that have kind of been made in the course of, let's say, business fora, where people have gotten to know each other and gotten to know the country, but also due to the region being more on the radar of people in Europe especially. And this, I think, is also thanks to the Berlin process, which at least once a year puts this small region, you could say, very much on the radar in the media, but also in the context of surrounding events, business fora, especially in this year, there has also been a business forum in the context of the meetings of ministers of economic affairs. So I think in this way, the Berlin process can provide some kind of at least small causal channel to promote the FDI inflows into the region, just by putting it on the picture and enabling these personal contacts.
Great. Thank you very, very much. The other Marie, do you also want to come in?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, it is, of course, very difficult to, or more wishful thinking when we talk about gender, what could be at some point a certain impact, because we cannot measure impact if there has been no input. However, there's a very small thing which maybe can serve as a good starting point. Because if we look, for example, at the recommendations that were put forward by the Gender Equality Forum this year, and how they translate into the new action plan on the common regional market, we can see that a lot of these recommendations made their way into the action plan, which then, if we're going further, is an integral part of the EU's growth plan for the region. So this is just one example to see how those recommendations can translate directly into then other outputs, other documents that can then serve as a working basis for further action. And this is why it is so important to actually have something like as a gender strategy put out, so that it can inform other work that is done within the Berlin process. But yeah, at this point, measuring impact on gender is absolutely impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think one of the reasons why we went with mapping studies and not impact studies. It's really hard also to pinpoint causality. But thank you so much to our both Maries for identifying some ways how we could get a little bit closer to the impact issue. Because obviously it's not just the output which we want to take a look at. And this is also another reason why the Berlin process takes place, but because it does want to have an impact. Silvana, and also then last but not least in this round, Marika, how would you address the impact issue?
It was not in the mandate of our study to do an impact, of course we did, but now with regards to the impact with regards to the economic results, I could also comment from my regular job and other studies done. And I would say it was definitely, for me, it's not a surprise that the trade within the region is going down. That has been something that is going on for a long time. And that was actually the first sign within SEFTA that is very difficult to achieve all these agreements on bilateral recognition of certificates, especially in the area of sanitary and phytosanitary measures and things like that. So if we want to look what was the economic impact of Berlin process, directly or indirectly, we need to look at SEFTA more specifically and all the agreements that it brings, also related to the flows of labor and flows of capital as well. This is something that at the first glance would say, well, there were not particular results. But then one of the issues, one of the main goals of the Berlin process was a part of enhancing the regional cooperation, also to bring the countries of the Western Balkans closer to the EU. And apparently the economic cooperation there was quite good. So when we say about the impact, I would put another perspective on the impact. The attention that this process actually brings to the economic issues related to the region. So when I was exploring all the possible documents related to the common regional market, economic integration, green transition, and so on, it was visible that everything that is going on an EU level or global level, it's somehow reflecting on the Berlin process level. But we cannot expect that the Berlin process would have a direct impact because they're not finances and funds directly related to it. But support is needed, and better coordination would actually bring also higher impact of the Berlin process in these fields. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Marika. And then I saw that a hand actually went up, and I'm going to call on Odetta to then come in. And I hope it's okay that I go with first names. Marika. Could you unmute yourself? You're still muted.
So when talking about impact, you know, the purpose of the study was not impact assessment, but I think we should start from the baseline. And the Berlin process had 4 original pillars to support the reform process, resolving outstanding bilateral and internal issues between the Western Balkan countries, achieving reconciliation, and then enhancing regional economic cooperation and building foundations for sustainable growth. in those terms, we heard already from the colleagues on regional economic cooperation and maybe sustainability aspect, but certainly, you know, it was set up in 2014 when the European Commission decided to absolutely hold the EU accession process, which was a massive blow to all Western Balkan countries, and suddenly they were frozen in time and space, you know, and kind of, yeah, forced to think about how to be with each other without the European perspective. And I think this, you know, this aspect of keeping the reforms going was an absolute. I mean, we need to agree. Maybe it was successful more or less, but I think we have to agree that giving the platform for the reform process to continue in a coordinating way between and within the Western Balkans region is absolutely one of the most important outcomes of the Berlin process. Maybe we can say that in terms of achieving reconciliation and resolving bilateral issues between the countries, that it has been less successful. Nevertheless, having, you know, Berlin process is often criticized for not supporting reconciliation initiatives, and yet the logic of the intervention was to create organizations or actions or projects who will then act and include all the 6 Western Balkan countries collaboratively, and in that way bring about reconciliation. So if we think in that way, it certainly may be not absolutely successfully, but importantly, it did provide for engagement, which ultimately, you know, somehow facilitated these important issues around reconciliation as well. And certainly, I think that is one of the important outcomes that we need to take into consideration.
Great, thank you so much. And for also pointing out that if we want to also really in a fair way evaluate the Berlin process, we also need to look at the goals. I mean, we certainly can also set our own evaluation scheme and identify criteria and indicators. But Marika, thank you so much for reminding us what the goals were or are of the Berlin process. So with this, I hand over to our first participant who wants to jump in, and I see that you are ready to go. I can already see your name up here on our screen. So if you turn on your camera and your mic, you are ready to go.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. It seems I cannot switch on the camera, but I hope you can hear me.
Christian is nodding that this is actually not possible, the camera.
Okay, perfect. Then, okay, greetings from Tirana. Thank you very much, Sharmanika and Christian, for the invitation. And also I'd like to thank the authors of the studies for the stock-taking research, which I think is very valuable and timely as we celebrate 10 years of the launch of Berlin process. I was also in the audience at the Civil Society Forum in Berlin, ahead of the Leader Summit, and I very much commend the work which has been undertaken in taking stock of the initiative and also exploring the ways forward. And here I would like to ask, well, actually 3 points, which are comments/questions. The first one concerns the people-to-people collaboration or cooperation among the countries of the Western Balkans, which is within the broader objective of reconciliation, which was just highlighted by Marika right now, one of the key objectives of the initiative. how would you value the success of people-to-people cooperation or interaction? And here I have in mind particularly youth cooperation, but also cooperation among the academies of sciences or collaboration in the science and research area. And from here, I would go to the third component, which was mentioned today, which is cooperation in the area of gender. This normative component, which I agree has been maybe not a constant feature of Berlin process in all chairmanships, have been more emphasized by some chairmanships than others, but success in that particular aspect has been rather patchy, I would say. So the second question would be more in particular with regard to gender component. How would you envisage the policy impact of that? And how do you envisage the institutional collaboration in that particular respect? Because I would say in the countries of the Western Balkans, gender is somehow dispersed among different institutions. In some areas, it is ministries of health and labor, some other ministries, some other places. It is in the, Ministry of Youth or Ministry of Interior when it is primarily related to questions of gender-based violence and so on. And some other, I would say, in more sort of a overarching way would be under ministries of foreign affairs. If we're looking at strictly the monitoring of, let's say, national action plans of 1325 of the resolution, or some other sort of more normative aspects of it. So this is the second question. How and what value, added value, would Berlin process bring to that? And a third component comment relates to enforceability of the commitments, regional commitments. I think it was rightly mentioned today that many of the mechanisms or institutions which are responsible for not only shaping the agenda, but also monitoring implementation of commitments, let's say in the economic area like CEFTA or other organizations like RCC and so on, have lacked enforceability, primarily because of political reasons. How do you envisage that in the future? Like some ideas. I know it's very broad, but some ideas. How do you think this could be improved? And maybe a very last comment and a broad question for all participants would be. Well, it was mentioned here the Berlin process was launched in a very critical juncture when, in fact, enlargement policy was lagging behind and there was some hesitation on the part of the EU. Now that we see a new momentum in relation to enlargement policy, how do you envisage the future of regional cooperation? Would it be as important as it was 10 years ago and in the past decade, or will it somehow be left behind enlargement policy? Thank you very much indeed for inviting me and for this very stimulating discussion this morning.
Thank you very much for those 4 excellent, not so easy questions. I should step back as a moderator and just let you moderate with all the questions you have. Fantastic. So I hand it back to our panelists. We certainly have to take a closer look at monitoring and also enforcement. That also brings us to, to the policy recommendations where I wanted to get to anyways. I also, before I hand over again to our panelists, throw into issue areas which were mentioned also in the chat function. And this is the issue area of anti-corruption and anti-corruption policies. And it's also the issue of area of climate change policies and energy transition. So if you could pick up on this in your comments as well, that would be great. And also on the first of those 4 questions about the people-to-people dialogues and how well that works, I want to add on this and ask all 4 of you if you think that the engagement processes which we have under the Berlin process, the different ones, are linked enough to each other, and if there is actually enough cooperation and exchange between those different engagement groups, strands, so to say. And with this, I'm always going to change up the sequence of our panelists to keep it spicy and dynamic. So I would start with Silvana this time, and then Marika, and then Marie and Marie Aimé.
Thank you, Stormy. I will start with the regional cooperation and the future of it, as there are lots of talks, especially now when some of the countries are actually closing their negotiations with the European Union. Some are starting and some are actually in some process of lagging behind due to some political or other issues. So the regional cooperation should not stop even if the countries will enter the Union. And it will, if we now talk in the period of the next 10 years of the Berlin process, as we could say that there will be regional initiatives, and maybe the regional cooperation will get a bit different form, that the countries that get into the EU will actually continue the cooperation with these countries. It's also the global trends of movement of labor, particularly people and capital, are changing. And we have the common regional market action plan, which for the next 4 years provides lots of regional initiatives. So on this point, we could say that, yes, the regional cooperation will be there. And how it's going to develop, is it going to be more successful from the previous 10 years, let's say, depends very much of the engagement of the regional organizations. RCC will get a new leadership now as of 1st of January, and every new leader actually could bring a wave of different fresh energy and changes. So having that in mind, and also having in mind that the RCC has already done a lot with regards to implementation of the first action plan of the common regional market. That's a good ground with regards to the area covered with them. With regards to the political cooperation, I believe Marika will talk more on that. But I will just add on the issue of corruption and green transition, as you mentioned. Green transition is already there, and it will be even more there regardless of regional cooperation or individual commitments by the countries, as the requirements that are set by international conventions and the requirements that are set by transposing the regulation of the EU into the Western Balkan countries are actually creating a specific demand of changes in this area. So definitely here we will see some changes. This area has been included in the Berlin process all the time. What is needed here, due to the dynamics and expensiveness of the process, is to ensure realization and support of these countries, actually not to lag pretty much behind the other countries, as we've seen of the slide of the study. On the issue of corruption, that has been an issue in more or less all the countries. It hasn't been tackled in the Berlin process, but it has been tackled in all other issues, and it's considered to be a national issue, so it's not a regional-wide one that is not a part of the Berlin process. But there are regional initiatives that envisage some cooperation in this area. So a better coordination of all the initiatives, which was one of our main findings of the study, is definitely needed. I think I covered some of the issues where I could provide more in-depth answers, and now I will leave the rest of that to the others. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely perfect, tackling almost all of them. And over to Marika.
Thank you very much. Yes, no, I was like, okay. Great questions, Odette, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you and you know, to have an engagement with you. I will try to be concise, but a lot of questions and some challenging ones as well. So starting with people-to-people collaboration, I think this is absolutely spot on, and I would certainly say that I see this as one of the Berlin process weaknesses, because there isn't, in 10 years, the Berlin process didn't manage to establish a viable and sustainable transfer mechanism from, you know, from the decision makers and policy makers to the citizens. We noted in our study that the Berlin process is usually underreported, that the decision makers and leaders seldom share any information about what has been, for example, initiated and decided and reported on in the leaders' summits. And even civil society actors and think tank actors, not to mention business forums, I don't think they have found an effective way to engage the citizens. So I think to the citizens of the Western Balkans in various spheres of influence and on topical actions, there actually hasn't been a lot of benefit when it comes to Berlin process. And I think we also have a recommendation that the process really has to find a way how to engage and be, you know, beneficial for the citizens themselves. When it comes to gender, I would like to say, you know, in the we need to be fair. I agree. I mean, gender is extremely important, of course, and there is, I agree with the missing normative component of the Berlin process. But I think we also have to acknowledge that some of the initiatives, organizations, and outputs have actually done a significant work on gender. So, for example, RICO, which is one of the main outputs of the Berlin process, has supported numerous projects and has spoken publicly, and individuals, you know, working on gender issues. Western Balkans Fund, which is an offset of the Berlin process, also has supported individuals and projects specifically focused on gender equality, gender-based violence, has spoken about it, has supported events. Also, Roma integration component of the Berlin process has focused on women, and has recognized that in each of the Roma ministerial meetings, declarations. So it's not like gender has never been mentioned in the Berlin process in these 10 years. But I think it is important to think about how to, you know, how to have this component in a more meaningful way. When it comes to anti-corruption, I want to say that it absolutely has been covered by the Berlin process. What is really interesting is that there has been a lot of focus on judiciary and anti-corruption measure in the first 5 years of the Berlin process, especially during the Italian chair and UK chair of the Berlin process. Italian National Anti-Corruption Authority has been strongly involved. There was support for activities, for regional activities, involving ministers of the interior, of the home affairs, what is problematic and is a big question, why did it drop off the agenda from 2020 on? Because the obvious corruption issues continued. So there is a solid base to go back to more support, and certainly it's one of the recommendations of the report that this should be picked up seriously again. And then I want to conclude with, no, I'm going to stop here. Yeah, and allow my colleagues to also answer some of the questions.
Thank you so much, because I also have to look at it a little bit at the time. And I want to do one last round with all four of them to pick up on one question, which is also still open in the chat function. But first, let's hear also from the gender perspective, Marie, and then from the economic perspective, Marie.
Yeah, I will only talk about gender right now. And thank you so much, Odetta, for those important and very hands-on point. So first of all, yes, thank you for mentioning the Women, Peace, Security agenda, which relates very closely to the Berlin Process's goal of reconciliation and is something that is incredibly important. And if we look at national action plans on the WPS agenda in the region, there is a mixed assessment, mixed commitment from countries. There's also a mixed history of how long they've already been working on national action plans and invested in. So there's definitely a lot of room for working together, sharing best practices, learning with each other. And yeah, because it relates to the area of reconciliation, if we turn it around, just shows that the gender dimension of reconciliation is something that is particularly important. So to have in all of the things that are, and we've heard before that that this is one of the areas where more should have happened or more needs to happen in the future, is that the gender dimension becomes very prevalent here. And I want to particularly mention here the topic of reprocessing gendered war crimes, which is something that requires a very distinctively regional approach, and then also relates back to the people-to-people approach and engaging citizens into those processes of reconciliation and reprocessing. Yeah, and then the other thing you mentioned, who is responsible for gender? I agree that this is a really big issue, but maybe to start with it is if we look at the question where gender equality is being dealt with in individual countries, we need to be realistic in the first hand and recognize that in the entire region, gender equality legislation is coming with different degrees, but is under threat anyway, that anti-rights movements are really, really strong across the region. Violence, gender-based violence is a very prevalent issue, and with a lack of enforcement of rule of law mechanisms, this is a very dreary picture overall. And then in addition to that, asking who is responsible on the ministerial level to deal with questions of gender equality is a challenge in order to develop one ministerial meeting. And I think what this points towards is 2 points. First of all, it shows us that if we really want to consider gender equality in a meaningful way, we really need a cross-sectoral approach, one that is not limited to one specific ministry and also not one specific topic. And then the other thing is that we really need gender mainstreaming guidelines that can serve as a working basis to give a strategic to give a strategic outline of how to tackle issues of gender equality in different formats, so that it can be done in a meaningful way, rather than very, like there's one little thing here and one little thing there, but it doesn't really connect into a broader picture. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. Over to Marie.
Yeah, maybe one last point for me to pick on would be the importance of regional cooperation, also now that there's a new momentum for EU enlargement. And I also want to link this to the decarbonization question, because I think this is one area where there's still, as I said before, a lot of progress to be made on the one hand, but then also regional cooperation plays an explicitly large role. And this we see, for instance, in all of the countries now looking into expanding their renewable energy sources, but then also the requirement for the grids to somehow take this and for the electricity markets to be connected to each other in order to achieve this challenge. So I think this is one clear link between the need for regional cooperation and the decarbonization agenda, where the countries need to really work together closely in order to really tackle this common challenge for all of the Western Balkan 6 countries. And at the moment, I don't really see this happening to a large extent. For instance, I also work a lot on these national energy and climate plans, also supporting the Kosovo government. And there's this element of transboundary consultation where you're supposed to consult your national energy and climate plan with your neighboring countries. For instance, to see how your infrastructure projects will also affect your neighbors and where you could cooperate. And this is really something that falls totally off the table. So a lot of issues are discussed with your plan. How does it affect your country? But this transboundary consultation is really a bit of the kind of last priority as it stands. So I think this is really something for the future to have an eye on.
Thank you very much. This is perfect. So I want to close with 2 very fast rounds. So I would like to ask you to just like a 1-sentence answer or 2-sentence answer to both of them. The first one is, and that's a wonderful question which came in the chat function, is which of all the Berlin process years was your favorite year and why? So that's our last round. And the second round would be then a look into the future. And that would be, if you can change one thing in the next cycle of the Berlin process, what would it be? So first round on looking back, very last round on looking forward. And Marika, let us start with you. Looking back, your favorite Berlin process year.
Oh, I have to say, I have to go with London because that was in that year, I think the London host managed to organize a really good good conversation between the decision makers and the civil society, because that's always that's always an issue. Decision makers have leaders summit, civil society has policy recommendations, but often they don't engage in a meaningful way, which is one of the main criticisms. And London host actually brought all the decision makers into the auditorium in several sessions and allowed Q&A and direct conversation between these two spheres of our societies. And I think they did it really well, which
Thank you.
Makes it my favorite.
Thank you so much. That's maybe also a pitch for the Brits for the next Berlin process, if they're interested in it. Silvana.
About the favorite year, maybe the years of the beginning, maybe Paris, I would say, as that really contributed a bit to somehow establishment of the process. It was first designed to last for 4 years, but then it became clear that it will actually last more. About what should be done better.
No. That's for the next round. We're not in that round yet. This round is looking back.
Yeah,
then the next.
Okay.
So Marie-Aimée.
Yeah, me for myself, I've only been following the process for the past 3 years, so I don't have too many options. But I would actually choose the current year then, because there have been 2 key achievements which we also followed in our work. The one being the access to the SEPA system for the Western Balkan countries, where we also did some analytical work to calculate the concrete economic benefits of that. So it's very nice to see this as a very tangible result. And the second one being the CEFTA unblocking, and then also linked to the drop of the unilateral ban on trade from Serbia from the side of Kosovo, which was also very good to see.
Thank you so much. And last but not least.
Yeah, I also wanted to go with London initially, and I think it's no surprise that that was the first year where we saw in the discussions meaningful output on gender perspectives because of those formats that were enabled. But yeah, I think in the end, I'm also going to go with this year because we had the Gender Equality Forum. And if we're looking at it really from this gender perspective, this was a real breakthrough. So yeah, I'm also, plus the memory is fresh and beautiful. So
thank you so much. That has been very enlightening. And now looking forward, the one thing you would like to change for the next cycle, and we start in the opposite order. So Marie, it's your turn again.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on what I just said, I think what would be great in terms of gender is to have some sort of continuity of the Gender Equality Forum and establish a formal structure to consider gender in years going forward and to really enable a process and continuity on that end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Marie.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, from the economic side, I would put this increased regional cooperation, especially when it comes to the promotion of regional trade and decarbonization on the agenda. And maybe for that, also bringing the Berlin process back to one of the Western Balkan countries to also establish kind of more large-scale matchmaking fora, for instance, I think could help to this end.
Thank you so much. Silvana. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, now it's that time. I would say better coordination and building an institutional memory of the Berlin process that was missing in the past 10 years. So what would be the mechanism? Either a small secretariat within the foreign ministry of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany or any other form, but that's definitely needed in order to be able to measure the success of the process in a better way in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Perfect. So we are going to conclude the to-do list for the policymakers with Marika.
Thank you. I would definitely agree with Silvana. I think some kind of a coordination office, and there is a lot of concern about and against institutionalizing Berlin process because it is seen as it would affect its being functional and then, you know, ad hoc, being able to ad hoc respond to the needs of the Western Balkan countries. But let me just clarify and be clear again, we're not, you know, it's not about institutionalization, but it's about coordination, which would then enable sustainability and also this transfer of priorities and planning process in a more meaningful way that is responsive to the all Western Balkan countries' needs and the engagement of the institutions. So definitely, yeah, let's just tighten it up a little bit.
So quite a lot to do. I think all of you four would agree that we should continue the Berlin process because it did deliver in the past, but that a few adjustments need to be made. For the difficult job of summarizing today's event and sending us off into the world again, I'm handing over to Christian. So thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, and over to Christian.
Thank you very much, Stormy. I will try to summarize everything now in 2 sentences. No, I'm not going to do this. It wouldn't be possible. I would like to thank you all for a very comprehensive discussion. Very interesting aspects brought up, and I think also some tough nuts to crack also for policymakers. I think especially of the sinking trade between the Western Balkan countries that really made me thinking. If I could pick a thing to change in the future, it would probably be whether policymakers could have a stronger focus on this and find out what's actually behind this kind of decline, which is surely not the goal of the Berlin process. But we're not going to solve this year. I think it will be interesting to see what's coming up next year. The political landscape has shifted a bit, especially in Germany. So I'm not really sure if we will know very soon what's going to be up with the Berlin process next year. But we will surely be sticking to it and following it and keep you informed on our activities of the Berlin process. And yes, I'm very glad that we had this possibility to close our Berlin process anniversary year with this very interesting discussion. I would like to thank again all the authors who contributed to this. Avi just shared again the links to the studies. So if you need some Christmas holiday reading, there's surely a lot in it to do this. And for everything else, I wish you a pleasant time at the end of the year, not too stressful period, and happy holidays afterwards. So thank you very much for being with us here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, and see you soon in the next year.
Thank you. Bye.